For those just joining us, I'm Charlotte Gibson, president of Charlottesville Now, and tonight's co-host is Donna Shaughnessy, president of the Sierra Club Piedmont Group. And Donna will introduce our speaker, and so take it away, Donna.
Hey, I'm excited to introduce Susan because she's so impressive. I'll read a few things from her bio because, well, she's been advocating for environmental protection and justice for 25 years, which is surprising since she looks like she's 30. So she's been doing it since she was a baby, clearly. So after launching the Allegheny Defense Project in her native Pennsylvania in 1994, she helped found the National Forest Protection Alliance and joined the staff as the Eastern Field Coordinator. She led their federal legislative efforts to protect national forests before ultimately serving as the organization's executive director. And then in 2006, she became the Director of Development for Legal Aid Justice Center here in Charlottesville. And after 10 years there, she returned to environmental work and was Director of Philanthropy at Appalachian Voices, a group that I also think highly of. So excited to merge her passion for the planet and the community she loves, she became the Community Climate Collaborative's Executive Director in 2019 and was recently appointed to Virginia's Clean Energy Advisory Board for a 3-year term. She's a graduate of Clarion University in Pennsylvania. I went to college in Pennsylvania too. Woo. She lives in Charlottesville with her husband, Mike, and her 2 nature-loving boys, Evan and Sebastian. So I'm really excited to hear what Susan has for us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. I have been in so many Zoom rooms with Donna, and it's always the best. I can't wait till we can be in actual rooms together here soon, I hope. I just got my first vaccine this week, so maybe soon.
Yeah. Could I just jump in here for a minute? I forgot to say we're going to have a Q&A afterward. So please put your questions in the chat as Susan is speaking, and Donna will moderate that at the end. And thank you so much.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Okay. All right. So I am so excited to talk to you about this program. My name is Susan Cruz, as Donna mentioned, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Climate Collaborative. Thank you so much for being here this evening for this program. I'm honored that this chapter of the National Organization of Women and the Sierra Club Piedmont chapter have invited me to speak to you this evening. They're a great organization, so it's an honor to be invited. Before telling you a little bit about my organization and how you can get more involved in taking action on climate, I'd like to share the stories of 3 women you may or may not have heard about before. So, has anyone heard of Eunice Newton-Foote? Anyone? I can't see anyone, but you know, most people haven't, right? Eunice Newton-Foote is a recently discovered scientist from the mid-1800s. In 1856, she published an essay called The Circumstances of Heat Affecting the Sun's Rays. She had been conducting research involving thermometers and 2 glass cylinders filled with various substances, including moist air and carbon dioxide. She left the cylinders in the sunlight and observed temperature changes. She wrote, quote, that a cylinder with moist air became warmer than the one with dry air, and a cylinder filled with carbon dioxide warmed even more. And once removed from the light, it was many times as long in cooling. She ultimately noted, quote, if, as some suppose, at one point in its history, the air had mixed with a larger proportion of carbon dioxide, then an increased temperature must necessarily have resulted. Eunice Newton-Foote discovered the possibility of climate change 150 years ago. Yet, she has not been credited with the finding. 3 years later, in 1859, John Tyndall published a more in-depth study identifying the gases responsible for the greenhouse effect. While it was not clear that Tyndall knew of Foote's work, it is curious that he was also published in the same scientific journal as Foote's paper in 1856. So he may have come across her work before doing his own study just 3 years later. But Eunice Newton Foote wasn't just an environmentalist, she was also a feminist. She was a signatory of the Declaration of Women's Rights in 1848 alongside Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Frederick Douglass, and her own husband, Elisha Foote. Eunice Foote may have been one of the first ecofeminists. So she's an important person to know, the woman who discovered climate change, as we now know. I also want to, I'm sure more people have heard of this woman, Rachel Carson. So I don't know if everyone has. Widely credited as the first nature writer, she published Silent Spring in 1962, documenting the devastating impact of widespread use of pesticide on bird populations. Silent Spring sparked the modern environmental movement, led to a ban on DDT, and is credited for the creation of our Environmental Protection Agency. The first ever Earth Day was held just 8 years after the publishing of that book in 1970, and Rachel Carson is largely credited as the inspiration for that designated day. Of course, Earth Day is just around the corner here next week, and we have Rachel Carson really to thank for that. The last woman I want to introduce you to before getting into some more details is Zuline Mayfield, and I'm quite certain that most of you have not heard of Zuline. While not necessarily a national figure, she is representative of hundreds, if not thousands of women, often Black women, across the country who have led the fight against environmental racism. She founded Chester Residence for Quality Living in the greater Philadelphia area to fight an unprecedented cluster of toxic waste incinerators, oil refineries, and other industrial polluting facilities. She's a personal inspiration to me, as I was in the audience when she spoke to a statewide conference of the Student Environmental Action Coalition in 1996, and when I was a college student leading environmental work. What she said that night changed my perspective on who contributes to and who is impacted by environmental issues or climate change. Following an incredible speech where she spoke about her fight against garbage incinerators in her community. So her community had these garbage incinerators, and they would literally import garbage from places like Virginia and other states to burn in Zuline's neighborhood. Following the speech of her fight, a young white student raised her hand and asked Zuline a question. Having noted that Zuline had thrown her soda can in the garbage earlier, instead of taking it home to recycle, she asked Zuline how could she be so careless. Zuline responded by noting appropriately that she didn't have the money to buy all the things the student had probably thrown away in her lifetime. And it was at that moment that I really witnessed the first othering that I had experienced that the environmental movement has done to people of color and others in the community, that you don't necessarily belong here. So Zuline not only directly addressed the white privilege to the group of majority white college students, she also succinctly explained environmental and climate justice. One of the defining features of environmental and climate injustice is when those who have contributed the least to the problem are the ones who suffer the most negative impacts. This can take the form of excessive waste that requires the construction of a new toxic waste incinerator placed in a low-income Black community, as was the case for Zuline, or it can take the form of rising temperatures of climate change, leading to increased energy bills, burdening households already struggling with housing affordability. Global climate change is impacting communities that are not white the most, African and island nations through rising sea levels, drought, and starvation, South and Central American countries suffering from more frequent and intense tropical storms, and our urban communities impacted by dangerous heat exposure, asthma, and rising energy costs. It is also impacting women. Globally, 80% of those displaced by climate change are women. Men have greater mobility. While not a climate disaster necessarily, scientists have noted that 3 times more men than women survived the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean. Women lost precious evacuation time, rounding up children and elders, while men escaped to safety. This is the case globally as climate disasters strike. When droughts hit or sea levels rise, women are a lot more focused on home with children and crops and tending households, while men are traveling either to seek food or work or just have greater mobility generally. So it is women who suffer the most impacts of climate change. Nationally, 56% of those in poverty in the United States, so more than half, are women, well more than half, well more than our proportionate share. More than half of poor families in the city of New Orleans were headed by single mothers when Katrina struck. So that gives you a sense of, when climate disaster does strike, who gets impacted. Locally, 53% of those in poverty are women. How might they be impacted by climate? Let's look at temperature changes to get a sense of what these communities might be facing. This is a slide that was put together for C3 by the Virginia Science Museum out of Richmond, and it features Charlottesville. This is Charlottesville's average annual temperature by year from the year 1895 on the left side to 2018 on the right side. Each stripe represents a single year, and the blue stripes are cooler than average temperatures, and the red stripes are warmer than average temperatures. So you can see how Charlottesville, right here at home, how our temperatures have changed over the last 20 years, and what our communities might be facing in terms of increased energy costs, higher risks for heat-related illness and death, higher allergies and asthma rates. All of this, our climate is changing. Climate change isn't just happening globally. It is also happening right here at home. So now I want to tell you a little bit about my organization. There are some other great ones in the community, including Donna's. I highly recommend, if you haven't already, follow Donna's incredible newsletter that will point you to all sorts of things you can get involved in. I'm sure if you put your email in the chat, Donna would be more than happy to add you to her mailing list. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about my organization, the Community Climate Collaborative, and tell you how you can get more involved with us if you're interested. Wherever you are, that's where C3 believes you need to start taking action on climate, and we're ready to meet you there. That, of course, means your business, your home, your school, your community, or it could mean where you are in your experience, from just getting started and getting engaged in climate or a seasoned advocate. We are here to help you be a part of climate solutions locally. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that in order to prevent the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, we need to reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Communities around the Commonwealth and across the nation are responding by setting their own goals to reduce emissions. Right here in Charlottesville and Albemarle County, we have set leadership goals aligned with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recommendations, 45% reduction by 2030. The Commonwealth of Virginia now also has its own climate goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2045, though I don't have that on this slide just yet, which communities will need to support. 88% of Virginians live in urban and suburban communities. So our ability to take action and get these emissions down is right here in our communities. We all need to do our part, and that's where we are focused in our work. So if you look at where emissions are coming from in our community and what needs to be done, you can see that the majority of our emissions are coming from 3 places: our homes, our businesses, and our transportation. In the county, the makeup is a little bit differently because you have a lot more traveling, and so transportation is a much more significant portion of emissions. But I want to point out to you the percent of that pie that is municipal emissions. So that's local government emissions are 5%, roughly 5% of both pies. That means that even if both of our local governments went net zero, put solar on every building, used only electric vehicles powered by solar, that we still would have only reduced emissions by 5%. So really, in order to impact climate and have an impact on climate, we all need to be involved. And we need to be reducing emissions in all the spaces where we live and work and go to school and go to church and all of those things. It is interesting that in C3's work that we consistently see women leading the charge. We just released this is just a little aside, but we had a community survey on transportation needs and what needs to change in transit. And 70% of the community survey responses were from women. So women really are stepping up and ready to take charge. There are many reasons people we talk to people every day about taking climate action, and everyone has a different motivation for getting involved. You might be motivated to save money in your home or your business. You might care passionately about climate and environmental justice or protection of the natural world. You might be concerned about the disproportionate impact that climate change has on women. What's different about C3 is that no matter what your why is, we're focused on collaborative solutions, and you will have a seat at the table as we design solutions for our communities. We all need to figure out what the best way forward is together. If we're not doing that, we're not going to reduce emissions in all the places we need to. At C3, we believe that the more individual action you take, the more you are ready to advocate and grow into climate leadership. We invest significant resources into community engagement, including on the policy side. Without small and increasingly larger actions coming from all sectors of the community, we will not reach our goals. By investing in engagement, we're also expanding the choir and redefining who identifies as a climate leader. This is our awesome, largely women-led team that we have at our organization. So you might meet them if you get more involved with our work. We also have some incredible women I've highlighted here on our board of directors, and I don't know if any of you know them: Kelly Palmer, Paige Perriello, Barbara Brown-Wilson, and Emily Francis. These are some great women who are serving on C3's board of directors and helping to lead us forward. We work in a number of, like I said, we talk a lot about homes, businesses, transportation. Our residential program really helps households figure out how to reduce their emissions. And we have a home energy challenge where if you go to cvillechallenge.org, if you're wondering what things you can do to reduce emissions, that website is just loaded with ways that you can reduce your impact on climate, and you'll even see how much each action will reduce your emissions in your household. You can enter all your energy bills and figure out what you need to do to reduce your impact. We encourage folks to do it as teams and host a power party. We're still doing them virtually. Take action together in your team and celebrate your success. This year, C3 also partnered with Albemarle County, the City of Charlottesville, and the D.N. Batten Foundation and the Virginia Discovery Museum to bring 1,200 climate activity kits to 4th and 5th graders in the county and city schools. These kits included fun activities like a home energy scavenger hunt and a solar nightlight and build your own windmill, but also connected families with energy efficiency resources in our community to help lower bills and reduce emissions. That's what that energy scavenger hunt guide for grownups, it was all about. So all these kits went home, and this is some of the first climate education in some of the classrooms that we're seeing in the city and the county. So this was a lot of fun to put together this year. We also work with businesses, nonprofits, and schools to meet their goals. We help them through our Better Business Challenge, and we just recently awarded 5 energy efficiency grants to low-income minority businesses. You can see here on the left, that's LG. I don't know if you've ever met LG over at the city market, but he sells his elixirs. We helped him last year with our last Better Business Challenge, and we helped a lot of businesses this year. But here's a little story that I want to tell you about why our model of engagement helps lead to climate leadership. It really demonstrates well our theory of change. So this is the Peabody School, and these students were really interested in doing their part to save energy, reduce their impact on climate. And so they've joined our Better Business Challenge. And their amazing teacher, Amy, really led them, and the students went through their entire school and counted all the light bulbs in the school and calculated how much they might save by switching light bulbs to LEDs. And they actually did the math to figure out how many solar panels they could fit on their roof. The school ultimately did an entire LED upgrade and did a rooftop solar power purchase agreement, offsetting 65% of their energy usage. And these students, because they had gotten engaged and actually been a part of the process of taking action, figuring out light bulb changes and solar, they were so confident that they not only spoke to the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, as you see them there on the right, about their climate targets, but they also went to Richmond to lobby with, I think that's the Sierra Club, or I believe that those are Sierra Club shirts they might be wearing, for Clean Energy Lobby Day, and spoke in favor of clean energy for the Commonwealth. So that's a great example of how getting more engaged and taking action in your own home or your own school allows you to have the confidence to advocate to leaders. We also work a lot on policy. We've got research projects on climate action incentives, climate policy advocacy highlights, local effects of climate change. We look for intersections where climate change meets other problems of our community so we can address them simultaneously. We've done some research around energy equity in Charlottesville. So I mentioned earlier the percent of women in poverty living in our community. Well, those women are definitely are impacted by energy burden. 1 in 4 Charlottesville households experience unsustainable energy costs, spending more than 6% of their annual income on energy. 4,000 households, or 1 in 5, spend more than 10% of their income on energy costs. So if we were able to reduce energy costs for these low-income households through energy efficiency or low-income solar, we would actually not only be reducing emissions, but also making housing more affordable. We're currently researching transportation equity and looking at how transit can play a role in improving barriers to mobility and increasing and expanding transit ridership. And we have a number of sign-on letters and recommendations that we engage with. So if you get involved with our organization, you may learn about opportunities to add your voice to our advocacy to local government. And we don't do it alone. I mean, this slide could have, I see Dana is on here from UVA Sustainability, but there are so many organizations that we work with in our community that we partner with. Virginia Discovery Museum was on this slide, the city, the county. We'd love to have a greater partnership with Charlottesville Now and other organizations in the community because it really is all of us working together that's going to help us reach our goals. So if you want to have an impact on climate and you want to know how to get more engaged, here are some things you can do. You can start where you are. You can sign up and add your voice at theclimatecollaborative.org/1-voice. That will automatically add you to our policy recommendation sign-on letters. You will always have an opt-out before we submit any letter on your behalf, but you'll automatically be adding your voice to policy recommendations for C3. You can join our programs or other organizations. You can get involved with Donna's work over at UVA Sustainability or Appalachian Voices. There are so many great organizations in this community who are really working hard to address the impacts of climate and make our environment more sustainable. But you can also join C3's programs, start a home energy challenge team, get your business, your school, your church involved, or volunteer. And I think the main thing that we try to have people do is to celebrate action taken, even the small ones. So the more people see other people taking action and changing things, the more likely they are to change things themselves. So when a household has solar on it, the neighbors around it are a lot more likely to have solar. If somebody starts composting, your neighbor might ask you how you like it, or your friends might inquire about the service and how it's working for you. So these are all things we can do by celebrating and sharing your action and getting more involved. We can all move forward together. I do want to point you to some further reading if you are interested. There's an incredible book that is now out called All We Can Save. It is a collection of essays and poems and stories by women about truth, courage, and solutions for the climate crisis. It is edited by these incredible climate leaders, Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson. I have a copy on my nightstand. I'm working my way through it. It's a pretty incredible book. It's where I learned about Eunice Newton Foote, who made the scientific discovery of climate change. And so if you're interested in learning a lot more about women and the solutions they're proposing for climate and who's leading the work, that's a great book to add to your reading list. So I'm happy to take questions at this point, and want to look at the screen and see all your lovely faces.
Well, thank you, Susan. That was great. That was great. I learned some things. so I'll be happy to answer questions if anybody's got anything.
I see somebody asking about air quality improving in the city as buildings are being upgraded. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits right now, and thinking, of course, in the COVID crisis, a lot of people are thinking about air circulation and improving efficiency. It also has a benefit of improving air quality and making schools and homes and buildings a lot safer during global pandemics. And so that's something that's been happening. We actually had an event that you can watch on our YouTube channel, was Strike a Balance, opening with safety and efficiency in mind. And it was all about how to build filtration systems and open schools and businesses efficiently and by improving air quality, and what the impacts that might have on reducing potential for the impacts of COVID. And we do know that homes, we've been in a number of homes lately with our partner Leap, and we have a project where we are switching out the entire heating and cooling systems in I think it's 8 homes in the city and the county. And we're switching those homes from fossil fuel based systems, propane, fuel oil, and natural gas, and completely electrifying the homes. And one of the homes we were in, they couldn't afford, and this was the case when I was a child as well. We had a fuel oil tank in my home, and I was in the home of a single mom, and there was frequent times when we couldn't afford to fill the fuel tank, because it's unlike your natural gas bill, which is a monthly expense. It's a one-time cost of hundreds and hundreds of dollars to fill that tank. And so when winter would come and we couldn't fill the fuel tank, we would frequently supplement heating in the home with a kerosene heater. And this was the case in one of the homes we went to recently with Leap. And while Leap and C3 were in the building, a carbon monoxide detector went off. Folks had been getting headachy and sleepy, and the kerosene was really impacting air quality. And people who are living in those sort of high air pollution conditions, you're just, when you've got a virus that's going around that impacts lungs and breathing, that is certainly something that, we need to take really seriously and make sure that we're providing as much support as we can to families to make their homes as healthy as possible.
Great. Hi, Susan. Virginia asked if you were making any recommendations to local governments.
Yeah, we are. We've made some recommendations with Albemarle County's climate action planning process. We made quite a few, and they actually incorporated many of them into the climate action plan. We are working to make policy recommendations around energy equity alongside the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition. But we haven't completed those recommendations. We were all set to move forward and sort of make a bigger ask. And when COVID hit, and so we need to get that process back up and running. But part of our transit equity research is we really are working to demonstrate how expanding transit ridership with a focus on equity will actually reduce, is better economically for the city and the county. It is better from a social impact perspective, and it also has a greater opportunity to reduce emissions. One of the things I think that we've really tried to focus on in our work is those intersections. So, when you think about expanding transit ridership, if you just want to double ridership of CAT, but you focus where you double that ridership on upper income households, and you're converting people who drive hybrids or EVs to being bus riders, you're not reducing emissions by a significant degree. But if you're focusing on underserved communities who might have less efficient vehicles that require a lot more fuel consumption to run, you're actually going to reduce emissions to a greater degree. So we can really accomplish community goals alongside each other. And so we're conducting focus groups right now. We had one last night that was entirely in Spanish with Spanish-speaking members of our community. And we have one tomorrow and another one next week, largely focused on communities of color, that we are trying to understand barriers to transit and transit ridership needs of those communities so we can make recommendations. Someone in our Spanish-speaking focus group last night mentioned that they live over in Woodbrook area by Core Brothers, and the closest bus stop requires them to cross 29 North. So these are examples of ways that, mobility in this community and the ability for people to travel without creating emissions of their own is just not really doable at this moment in time. And so we're going to be making some direct recommendations following that research for not only hoping that the city and the county will commit to doubling transit ridership, but to do so with several other recommendations alongside it for how to do that.
Cool. Well, and Charlotte asked if there's any state or federal legislation you'd like us to lobby for.
Well, we just ended the General Assembly session, so there was there's been some really great climate action that has happened in the last two General Assembly sessions with the Virginia Clean Economy Act. This session really focused on the clean cars legislation that went through the General Assembly, as well as a number of other great pieces of legislation that I know the Sierra Club worked on. And, Ralph Northam just made an executive order banning styrofoam. So there's been some really good progress in the environmental world. I think next year, it's looking like transit is going to be a focus of some General Assembly work. We're also really hoping that commercial buildings will get some attention in figuring out how do we encourage businesses or incentivize businesses to reduce emissions. And so we're currently exploring those items, but we don't have any just yet because it's a little ahead of the game. Federal is pretty far away from what we do because we're so focused locally. But I do think there's been some great work being done by the Biden administration. I'm pretty encouraged by the proposals that have been coming out, particularly around infrastructure, that I think would be really help us advance things on climate. So we will be posting about them when we know of them. But there's nothing that I know of right now. But I do think the city is hopefully going to be relaunching its climate action planning process sometime soon. And that will be a great opportunity for folks to get involved.
Yeah. And I think we're going to be seeing Albemarle County's a greenhouse gas inventory here shortly. So that will be really
Have
cool.
you heard about when it's going to come out?
Oh, well, I heard a month ago it was going to be out in a week. So anytime now, I guess.
I haven't heard about it yet. We are, that's probably going to come out at the worst possible time when I've got too many other things going on. But yeah, so Albemarle County, they're going to be releasing their greenhouse gas inventory. They hadn't done one since 2008. So we're saying, we're going to reduce emissions by 45%, but we have no idea. That emissions chart I showed at the beginning, we have no idea where emissions are right now in Albemarle County. The county has grown a fair amount. So I'm really excited that they've been digging into this and doing this inventory and that they're going to release it soon. We are really hoping to do an energy equity study of Albemarle County like we did for the city of Charlottesville to really determine which census tracts in the county have the highest energy burden and what problems do we need to tackle around energy burden in Albemarle County.
So we have a question. One is from Uday, says, I am looking to help to prepare a business model and provisional patent relating to green energy mobility. Any help or link would be great.
Wow. That's really interesting. I don't know if I have a link that I could share around green energy mobility, but if you send me an email with more information, I can try to point you in the right direction if I can. But nothing is coming top of mind, I'm sorry to say.
And Peter Gates asked if C3 partners at all with the local food hub.
We haven't partnered with the local food hub at this point. We've been really focused on building energy and for residential and homes and transportation. There are, the local food hub, but also Cultivate Charlottesville has been doing some great work around food justice and food access, and we're big fans of their organization. Also, the Piedmont Environmental Council has a great local food program. And so there are so many organizations just doing incredible work in that space. And we're really focused on the buildings and transportation spaces, but absolutely encourage folks to get involved with those groups. There are some great ones. We did a bike ride before COVID where we toured all the community gardens that the Urban Agriculture Collective and Charlottesville City Schoolyard Garden maintain. That was awesome. That was a really cool event where we encourage people to get out and see these, how local food can impact, communities. And also it's great for climate. So, the fewer miles your food has to travel. I see Robin's sharing her screen, but the fewer miles your food needs to travel, the better it is for climate. If you're eating a tomato from South America versus one grown right here in the Piedmont region, that's a lot of better choice for climate.
Great. And any other last any other questions anybody has?
I see, Charlotte, you shared that bill. Do you know more about that bill?
You're on mute, Charlotte. So.
I don't know about it. I just happened onto it. It says the bill establishes the Federal Interagency Working Group on Women and Climate Change within the Department of State. The bill outlines the functions of the working group, including the coordination of agencies' policies and activities relating to combating the effects of climate change on women and improving the government's response to and strategy for climate change. And the department must submit a strategy to prevent and respond to the effects of climate change on women.
Nice.
Sounds interesting.
Sounds pretty good, huh?
Yeah, pretty good. I see a question about what recommendations do we give underserved community members to live sustainably on a daily basis, and what's our outreach like, and how do we keep them engaged long term? So it's really interesting. We tabled a lot pre-COVID, and we used to have this fun tabling gimmick to try to get folks over to our table that was guess your carbon weight, like carnival style. And so we would have members of, general members of the community come up, and we would ask them questions. Do you recycle? Yes. Do you compost? Sometimes they said yes. And then you'd get to questions about how big your house is, and how many cars do you have, and how much do you travel, and how often do you stay in hotels? And it would give an estimated annual carbon footprint. And we were always surprised by, sometimes we were surprised. Maybe we weren't, because we sort of knew what was coming, but they were often surprised by how large their carbon footprint was. And we'd have members come over from the community who were traveling by bike, and we'd ask them questions. Do you recycle? No. Are you a vegetarian? No. Do you own a car? No. Do you travel? How often do you stay in a hotel? And these answers were no. And their carbon footprint, while not traditionally thought of as climate advocates, their carbon footprint was very small. And so I think it's not so much making recommendations to underserved community members for how they should live sustainably. It's more about changing public systems to help all of us live and travel more sustainably, and ensuring that those community members have access to services, jobs, local food, doctors, businesses, and churches and community centers, so that they can travel without a carbon footprint and travel more easily and increase their mobility. The majority of the households in our community who have high energy burden, high energy costs, are renters. So they are not directly in charge of their energy bills, and their ability to invest or desire. I mean, if I was renting, even if I have the desire, I wouldn't necessarily want to invest in energy efficiency upgrades on a property I did not own. And the landlords aren't necessarily motivated to make a change because they don't pay the bills. So it doesn't matter if the energy bills are high to some landlords. We're working on changing that perspective for landlords. If their houses are more affordable energy-wise, they're more likely to keep a renter long-term. Housing is more likely to be stable. And we're working to create programs and incentives. We had a program that was created that unfortunately ran out of funding during COVID, but it was called the Voucher Energy Efficiency Pilot. And that program incentivized landlords to accept rental housing vouchers, which are vouchers for folks who can't afford rent on their own. And many landlords have been rejecting them in the past. And so we created this program that would give landlords a loan for large-scale energy efficiency upgrades. And for each year they had a housing choice voucher tenant in their property, the loan was forgiven at 20%. And so it incentivized landlords to both improve the energy efficiency on their property, reducing the monthly bills for the tenants, and helping to make housing more affordable and expanding access for voucher recipients. And so that program, it's called the Voucher Energy Efficiency Pilot. We did one household, and that's part of one of our recommendations is going to be to refund that pilot and make sure that we really look at those results and see if that is an effective tool to incentivize landlords to do energy efficiency upgrade. Because that's a problem we need to solve, is how do we get landlords motivated to upgrade the property when they don't pay the bills? And we've got to figure out a way to reduce the cost for tenants.
Great.
Dana has had her hand up for a while. She would like to ask a question. Dana, are you able to unmute yourself?
So in the meantime, no. Oh, yes, there she goes. Okay, go. Take it.
There we go. Okay, cool. Thank you. So my question is sort of about C3's philosophy, or Susan, maybe your philosophy. I noticed on this call, we have a lot of people who are really engaged politically, like names that I recommend. And I am like eternally grateful for all the great work everybody is doing, because we know that we need policy change to address these like big global challenges. However, my area of expertise and like my skill set is really better for like individual action. And I'm not saying I've experienced this from anyone on the call, but there's sometimes like some shaming almost when people are like, we don't have time to focus on individual action. We need bigger changes. I'm wondering what like you or C3 would say, like what's sort of your reaction to why individual action is a big part of C3's mission?
Yeah, I think it allows everyone to be a part of solutions. And I think, one of the challenges that climate advocates have had for a long time is climate change feels overwhelming and it feels hard to solve and it feels very outside of self. Like even if what's changing my light bulbs or doing, driving less really going to do for global climate change. But what's celebrating that action and getting folks engaged there, it really helps people understand the issues, the challenges. If somebody wants to do energy efficiency work in their home, they start learning where the barriers are. I mean, I'm leading a climate organization, and we just did energy efficiency improvements in our home. And the first contractor we called came over and looked at our natural gas furnace and said, you don't want an electric furnace. You just want to replace this one. It's not, electric won't be good enough. And of course, I knew better, so we got a different quote. And the company that we use put a monitor on our system and found that the furnace we have is 5 times too large for our house, 5 times. And so it's using so much energy and it heats up the home really fast, but then it stops. So it would run like 5-10 minutes because it's just so gigantic of a piece of equipment and so energy intensive. And so in going through that process, I now understand better policy recommendations that might need to be made around energy efficiency programs. And so we really believe that wherever you are, there's a place for you in the climate movement, no matter what your business is. We are also, you might be surprised to find that C3 has partnership with a local car dealership and a local fuel company. We have a partnership with Carter Myers Automotive. They are, Pete Borchis of Carter Myers is on our board. They have put solar now on 4 of their car dealerships. They are promoting EVs in the community, and they recently worked, partially after working with C3 for a couple of years, to help get clean car legislation passed in the General Assembly this year. And they got the Virginia Automotive Dealers Association on board and backing that legislation. And that is an example of a business where, we could have easily have said, we're not going to work with that company because they sell fossil fuel vehicles. Well, by celebrating the action they were willing to take and helping them to reduce their emissions, they are now helping to change emissions for the entire state of Virginia and actually leading in their industry and doing national talks on how dealers can convert to EV sales. So there's just some really, I think we've got to get beyond what's the best way, what's the only way, what's the right way. It's every way, and every action needs to happen. We need the big actions. We need the big policy change, and we need the small actions because we need everyone to feel a part of this movement. It has to be all of us or we won't reach our goals.
Susan, thank you. Kabi Hoffman asked, oops, I just lost it now. Can you tell us more about the energy equity audit on energy for the city?
Yeah, so we looked at U.S. Census data and U.S. Department of Energy data, and sort of basically, if you look at the average energy burden of Charlottesville, it looks like it's not significant because we have a tremendous wealth gap in our community. So we have households that have really high incomes in our community. That wealth gap hides a lot of inequity because it throws off averages. It makes the average burden look small because basically average energy burden is the total of all energy bills and the total of all income, no matter what. So if you look community-wide, it looks like we have a very low energy burden. But if you dial down into census tracts in the community, so you get to that like more neighborhood level, that's when you start to see disparity. And what we saw was the 10th and Page neighborhood actually had half of the households in the 10th and Page community having more than 10% energy burden. And anything above 6% is considered to be unsustainable. To put it in context of housing affordability, housing advocates will tell you that if total housing costs are more than 30% of income, so that's total housing costs including rent and utilities, has to be below 30%. Well, if 10% or 20%, which we found in some households, are energy costs alone, you can be certain those houses are not affordable for communities. And so it really allowed us to sort of demonstrate how energy efficiency can be a helpful tool in housing affordability, and why we really need to focus on boosting energy efficiency programs and figuring out that tenant landlord disparity there, where we've got that disincentive for anybody to fix the problem, and we've got to figure out a way around it. And we're currently working on recommendations for that now.
Great. This looks like the last chance to ask a question. These have been really good questions so far, so I'm really glad to bring out extra fun. Charlotte, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I'm just reading one more. Okay. Any actions, there's a question from Judy Marie that says, any actions on regenerative movement, Kiss the Ground, which is all about working the carbon cycle in the soil?
Yeah, I mean, we're not, like I said, we're very focused on buildings and transportation. But I think, our partner at the Piedmont Environmental Council would be, I don't know if they're digging into this at all. I'm sorry, bad pun there. But I think that's the sort of work that would be perfect for their organization. They work with a lot of farms, a lot of farm communities, and it would be really interesting to see that work explored in the county. We're very focused on urban Albemarle and Charlottesville, that sort of that center of communities. How do we I basically walk around town going, I wonder how we could reduce that building's emissions by 45%. Is basically how I spend my days. And so any company that comes to us, it sort of doesn't matter what they do. If you can get your emissions down by 45%, then you're doing your part to reduce emissions. And that's what we all need to be doing. We're going to be, stay tuned on C3's channels for an announcement on May 5th of local businesses who are doing just that, who are making a significant commitment to reduce their emissions. We're going to be having a press conference on May 5th. And I believe, fingers crossed, he says he's coming. Governor Northam will be there as well. So more on that, but you can follow us at C3 Climate on social, or sign up for our newsletters to hear more about that. I can't share any more than that right now.
All right.
So that's great, Susan. Thank you so much. Donna, do you have any last thoughts, announcements before we wrap up?
No, if anybody, actually I have a personal email list that Susan was referring to, but also I'd like to tout the Sierra Club. It's an environmental events newsletter. Takes in information from all the environmental groups in the area, and we're blessed with a lot. So if anybody would like to be on that one, please put your name in the chat.
I want to thank Susan so much for joining us tonight. It was a wonderful presentation. Really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, Susan, so it's really a precious gift of time that you've given us, and we appreciate that.
Well, I really thank you for having me. I was actually at a NOW meeting before the pandemic, so a while ago, feels like a while ago now, but I really appreciate the advocacy you do. And, so many organizations I wish I could give more of my time to, but I'm honored to be here with you this evening.